If you want to go ahead and turn to Matthew chapter 1, that's where we'll be looking here in just a few minutes. It'll take me a few minutes to get there, but that's where we're headed in the Bible today. Matthew chapter 1, of course, that is on the sermon outline, the back of the sermon outline. Try to make it easy for you in that way. Most of us probably don't know a whole lot about our ancestors. Some of you may, but I would venture to say that most of us just don't know that much about our ancestors. It's very likely that you know very little even about your own great-grandparents. Oftentimes in families, if you go back past grandparents, there's very little knowledge about our ancestors, even just that relatively close of a distance in the past. Of course, those places where you're able to trace your ancestry have become popular, and people who use those services sometimes get some really surprising information. You've probably seen some stories like that. Everybody looks like they're looking at the screen. Take that off there. I don't want them looking at that. Becky made too pretty of a graphic. You're just like, oh. Take that off there too. They'll be there. Just give them a black screen. They're not capable of paying attention. I rarely get distracted by the reaction of the congregation, but it's like no one's looking at me. They're just looking at the screen. I thought, are the words on? Oh, what's going on? All right. Right here, people. Right here. Okay. So there are those places that help you trace your family ancestry, and you've probably seen stories of people who have done those, and they get really surprising information. Sometimes it's good information, like they find out that they're related to someone who is really famous and someone who's highly accomplished. Maybe they find out there's some royal lineage in their ancestry. And then others find that, like they're a different ethnicity than they thought they were. They were always told they hailed from one part of the world, and actually they find out their family's from a different part of the world altogether. And then, of course, sometimes people get information about their ancestors that just isn't very good. They find out that they do not descend from the highest quality of people. Their family wasn't famous, it was infamous. Their family wasn't noble, it was ignoble. Those type things. My family is like most families. We do not know that much about our ancestors. We don't know much about the Burd ancestors. But we have found a few interesting things over the last couple of years or so. Our family comes from Parkersburg, West Virginia. And one of the things that we found is that generations of Burd men were named George Washington Burd. I'm not like generations of men. George Washington Burd the first, George Washington Burd the second, the third, the fourth, on and on and on. And this continued until my dad's grandfather was born. For generations before him, all of the Burd men were named George Washington Burd. And then my dad's grandfather, my great-grandfather, was born, and his father named him Dent Burd. He was not going to continue with the tradition of George Washington. And so he broke this long tradition with the name Dent. We visited the Burd family cemetery. There is a Burd family cemetery we discovered in Parkersburg, West Virginia. And it's like 500 yards off the road. There's no road to it. There's no path to it. You just have to walk through a cornfield to get to it. Thankfully, the cornfield was mowed down at the time we were there. And so we walked back to the Burd family cemetery. And the cemetery was divided in two sides. On one side was all of the Burds whose name was spelled with a Y, B-Y-R-D. And on the other side was all the Burds whose name was spelled like my family with a U, B-U-R-D. My dad got in touch with a guy online who had done some research into the Burd family, and he asked him how the different spellings came about. There's Burd with an I, there's Burd with a Y, there's Burd with a U. And the answer was that the spelling seems to have been tied to the educational levels of the different branches of the family. And so that tells you something about the branch that we came from. We came from the branch that spelled Burd with a U. Now, I've already spent too much time on this, but I'll just mention that the same guy informed my dad that our branch of the family tree was not exactly a genteel group of people, and he provided a newspaper article that, if I understand correctly, my dad and I tried to communicate about this, and we didn't get everything squared away, but if I understand correctly, my dad's great-grandfather, so Dent's dad, shot a man to death in Parkersburg, West Virginia. Those are our people. Those are our people. Family trees, ancestors. When we learn about them, it can be quite interesting. Matthew opens his gospel with the genealogy, sharing the family tree of Jesus. Before he gets to the announcement of and the birth of Jesus later in the first chapter of Matthew, which we're going to look at Christmas Eve, he opens up with the genealogy of Jesus. Now, this is the 21st year that I have had the opportunity to stand in this pulpit and preach messages at Christmas time. And in that time, I'm pretty certain I've covered every aspect of the narrative surrounding the birth of Jesus except this one. I have never preached, that I can remember at least, I have never preached on these 17 verses of Matthew, the genealogy of Jesus, but today I am. And what we're going to find is that the genealogy of Jesus includes some really sketchy people. It's full of broken people, which of course is the only kind of people there are. It's also populated with morally compromised people. It is populated with morally scandalous people. And the kind of people that populate Jesus' ancestry tells us some really important things that I want to highlight for us today. So let's look at the text. It's Matthew 1 through 17. I'll read and you follow along as I do. As I read this, you're going to know why it's taken me 21 years to get to this text for Christmas. It is not the most flowery or inspiring 17 verses that you will find. Okay? Here we go. This is the genealogy of Jesus the Messiah, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Abraham was the father of Isaac, Isaac the father of Jacob, Jacob the father of Judah and his brothers, Judah the father of Perez and Zerah, whose mother was Tamar, Perez the father of Hezron, Hezron the father of Ram, Ram the father of Amminadab, Amminadab the father of Nahshon, Nahshon the father of Salmon, Salmon the father of Boaz, whose mother was Rahab, Boaz the father of Obed, whose mother was Ruth, Obed the father of Jesse, and Jesse the father of King David. David was the father of Solomon, whose mother had been Uriah's wife. Solomon the father of Rehoboam, Rehoboam the father of Abijah, Abijah the father of Asa, Asa the father of Jehoshaphat, Jehoshaphat the father of Jehoram, Jehoram the father of Uzziah, Uzziah the father of Jotham, Jotham the father of Ahaz, Ahaz the father of Hezekiah. Are you feeling Christmassy? Hezekiah the father of Manasseh, Manasseh the father of Amon, Amon the father of Josiah, and Josiah the father of Jeconiah and his brothers at the time of the exile to Babylon. After the exile to Babylon, Jeconiah was the father of Shealtiel, Shealtiel was the father of Zerubbabel, Zerubbabel the father of Abihud, Abihud the father of Eliakim, Eliakim the father of Azor. Azor the father of Zadok, Zadok the father of Akim, Akim the father of Elihud, Elihud the father of Eleazar, which is a street that I lived on for 20 years, Eleazar the father of Mathan, Mathan the father of Jacob, and Jacob the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary, and Mary was the mother of Jesus, who is called the Messiah. Thus, there were 14 generations in all from Abraham to David, 14 from David to the exile to Babylon, and 14 from the exile to the Messiah. So what we know about Jesus, which goes beyond the message that I have today and the purposes of the message today, but what we know about Jesus is that he is unique in that he is both fully human and fully divine. He was conceived of the Holy Spirit. He was born of a woman. And so what we've read today is the human genealogy of Jesus. And what I want to highlight for us today is that Jesus' family tree includes broken and morally scandalous people. As I already mentioned, everyone in the genealogy of Jesus is broken, because that's the only kind of human beings there are. We are all sinful. None of us are the way that we were meant to be. That acknowledged, some of the people in Jesus' family tree are what you might call notorious sinners. Notorious sinners. Their lives included moral scandal. There are more. We could look at many more in this list that I'm going to look at today, actually. But I want to highlight 6 people in Jesus' genealogy who were notorious sinners. And the first 2 are Judah and Tamar. Now, the story of Judah and Tamar is a fascinating story. It's really kind of a crazy story, and it's a long story. And so I'm just going to highlight some of the lowlights, and maybe you'll want to read about it. You can read about this story in Genesis chapter 38. But here's kind of the condensed version. Judah was one of the sons of Jacob. You know Jacob, of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob fame. And he had a son named who married a woman named Tamar. Died. And the custom at that time, which is very weird to us, but the custom of the time was that when a married man died, his brother would take his wife as his own in order to continue his family line, the brother's family line, and in order to continue the brother's inheritance and to provide social and financial security for his brother's widow. And if his brother and his wife had not yet had children, then he was supposed to have children with her, and those children would be counted as his brother's children for the purpose of continuing his brother's line. Er's brother was Onan, but Onan did not like the idea of having a child with Tamar that would be counted as his brother's child. And so, even though he had intimate physical relations with Tamar, the best way I can say this is he interrupted the process so that she would not become pregnant. It's about as delicately as I can handle that. This was greatly displeasing to God. It was so displeasing to God that he killed Onan. That left Tamar still without an heir. Judah, her father-in-law, then promised, and this is another thing we can't wrap our heads around, different time, different place, promised that when his younger son Shelah came of age, he would have Shelah marry Tamar and provide her with children. But Judah did not keep that promise, and Tamar continued unprovided for by the family that was supposed to ensure her well-being. And so she devised a plan. She decided to take matters into her own hand. And here is the plan she came up with. She disguised herself as a prostitute. And she sat at the entrance to the city where prostitutes made themselves available. Judah, her father-in-law, saw her and arranged to have relations with her. Now, just imagine her estimation of Judah was that if I disguise myself as a prostitute and sit at the city gate, he will come and want to do business with me. That tells you a little something about Judah and what kind of a person he was. And so she was right. Judah arranged to have relations with her, and he negotiated a price for this transaction, and the price, again, different time, different place, was a goat from his herd, which he didn't have with him. This story is in the Bible. And so she asked him to leave some of his belongings as collateral until he would come back and pay the price of the goat. And so he did. He left some of his belongings with her. And after this whole process was over, he sent his servant to pay her, but the servant couldn't find her. 3 months later, Judah was informed that his daughter Tamar was guilty of prostitution and was pregnant. And here was Judah's response in Genesis 38:24. Bring her out and have her burned to death. Now think about this man. He knows that he has been with a prostitute. But when he learns that his daughter-in-law has engaged in prostitution, he's willing to kill her. On top of all the other horrible things about Judah, the man was a huge hypocrite. So she's brought before Judah. And when she is, she produces the items that he had left with her as collateral. His seal and his staff. things that clearly, like they belonged to him. Everybody knew they belonged to him. And here's how she answered him. I am pregnant by the man who owns these. And then she added, Genesis 38 tells us, see if you recognize whose seal and cord and staff these are. And of course he did, and everyone else did as well. And in Genesis 38:26, Judah acknowledges that his sin was worse than hers. And he says, she is more righteous than I, since I would not give her to my son Shelah. Twins resulted from the union of Judah and Tamar. The twins, as we saw in the genealogy, Perez, well, we saw Perez at least, and then Zerah. Judah, Tamar, and Perez are part of the genealogy of Jesus Christ. The people from whom Christ descended. A man who dealt with his daughter-in-law treacherously. He was supposed to make sure she was cared for, and he did not. A man who had no problem employing the services of a prostitute. And this is just what we learn about him in Genesis 38. In Genesis 37, we learn that he was involved in selling his brother Joseph into slavery. Now, he did better there than some of the other brothers because he didn't want to kill Joseph like some of them did, but he was certainly okay with selling him into slavery. This is the man, Judah, that is part of Jesus' genealogy. And a woman, and again, he acknowledges she was more righteous than him, but still she doesn't fare very well in this story. She was willing to pose as a prostitute and have physical relations with her father-in-law. These people are in the genealogy of Jesus. And then you go on. Tamar posed as a prostitute to deceive her father-in-law. But the next person that I want to highlight from Jesus' family tree was a known prostitute. That was her regular employment, and that's Rahab. And for the sake of time, I'm going to start to move faster with the rest of these. You can read the story of Ahab in Joshua 2, which identifies her as a prostitute and tells how she helped the spies of Joshua scope out Jericho and the promised land. It's another fascinating story. It's another story you really should read sometime. So Rahab, a prostitute, is part of Jesus' family tree, but not only is she a part of Jesus' family tree, she is listed in Hebrews 11, which we know as the Faith Hall of Fame. Hebrews 11:31, by faith, the prostitute Rahab, because she welcomed the spies, was not killed with those who were disobedient. And then we come to some names that are a little more familiar to most of us. David and Bathsheba in the genealogy of Jesus is referred to as who had been Uriah's wife. And of course, if you know the story, you know there's a big story behind that. David and Bathsheba are part of the genealogy of Jesus. David, of whom Jesus was called the Son of David. David, the man who the Bible calls a man after God's own heart. And yet he was a man who made many mistakes and who engaged in a moral scandal of the highest order. You can read about David in 2 Samuel 11. David saw Bathsheba bathing on a rooftop. He became overcome with lust for her, and so he sent for her. And they had an affair that resulted in the birth of Solomon, who I'll highlight here in a minute. Discovering that Bathsheba was pregnant and that her husband could not possibly have been the father because he was off fighting in David's army. The guy is fighting in your army, putting his life on the line for you. And you have an affair with his wife. So here's what David did. He brought Bathsheba's husband back from the battle. And the reason he did this was he was hoping that when he brought him back, that Uriah and Bathsheba would be intimate with one another, and then the pregnancy could be passed off as legitimate. But Uriah was an honorable man, and he refused to enjoy the pleasure of intimacy while his fellow soldiers were still out on the battlefields. And so David's plan is thwarted. And he knows that the affair is going to be exposed. And so here's what he does. He sends Uriah back to battle, and he instructs the commanders to issue a retreat to issue an order to retreat. So put Uriah on the front of the battle line and then call for a retreat, but don't tell Uriah to retreat. Leave him out there on an island, leave him by himself, and then he will be killed in battle. And of course, that's exactly what happened. David, adulterer. David, murderer. In recent years, I almost hate to mention this, but you may have heard this discussion, so I'll mention it. In recent years, there's been speculation that beyond all of that David may have also been a rapist because he sent for Bathsheba. And women of the time were not able to refuse the advances of a king. And while a king certainly could have done that in that time and culture, they absolutely could have done that kind of thing. I think we need to make very certain that we stress there is no suggestion in the text that that was the case. We have every reason to believe, according to the text, that Bathsheba was a willing participant. And so both were sinful, both were morally scandalous. Both are part of the genealogy of Jesus. And David is the person in Jesus' family tree with whom Jesus is most closely tied, most closely associated throughout Scripture. Jesus, the son of David. And then there's Solomon, the child born of David and Bathsheba's sin. You can read about him in 1 Kings 11. And I'll just note this about Solomon, that against God's specific instructions, Solomon took hundreds of wives from nations all over the world. And if that was not bad enough, he engaged in idolatry by following the gods of some of his wives. And that included, and I'm going to be honest with you, I had forgotten this until preparing for this week. That included that he built an altar to the detestable god of the Ammonites, Molech, who was associated with child sacrifice. Solomon, disobedient. Solomon, an idolater. Solomon built an altar to Molech. Solomon, part of the genealogy of Jesus. All of these people, and these are just the ones I chose to highlight, are part of Jesus' family tree. Treacherous and sexually immoral people, a prostitute, someone guilty of murder, more sexually immoral people, disobedient and idolatrous people, even someone who built an altar to the detestable god Molech. And it's interesting to consider that the genealogy of Jesus here in Matthew 1 is not exhaustive. There are names in Jesus' family tree that Matthew omitted from his genealogy. It's also interesting to note that there are names added to the genealogy, names that Matthew added that at the time usually would not have been included in the genealogy. And that's specifically the names of the women in the genealogy. That Tamar and Rahab are included is unusual for the time. And scholars think that one of the reasons Jesus omitted some names is that what he was trying to do with his genealogy is really trace the royal lineage of Jesus. And so he was emphasizing those people who were tied in some way to the royal lineage of Jesus. And then what they believe is happening with him including people that often would not have been included, such as Tamar and Rahab, of course, in addition to Judah, David, Bathsheba, Solomon, and many others that we could have covered. They say that this inclusion was very intentional and for a very specific purpose. What it seems is happening here is that God guided Matthew to write the genealogy of Jesus as he did, showing the number of morally scandalous people in the family tree in order to show through the genealogy that salvation is by grace and that no past disqualifies a person from God's redemptive purposes. This is what we learn from the genealogy of Jesus. Salvation is by grace. And this is what we learn, that no matter what a person's past is, it does not disqualify them from God's redemptive purposes. God will redeem anyone. It's been said that before Jesus ever preached the gospel, his family tree, his genealogy preached the gospel. And I agree with that. Here's another closely related thing we learn from Jesus' family tree. God is not embarrassed by the stories of broken and morally scandalous people. He's not embarrassed by them. He redeems their stories, but he is not embarrassed by their stories. Judah and Tamar, Rahab, David and Bathsheba, Solomon, all big time sinners. And God is not embarrassed of any of them. God claims all of them, and God redeemed each of them. Judah becomes the leader of the tribe from which Jesus came. You may have heard Jesus referred to as the Lion of the tribe of Judah. This is the Judah. God redeemed his story, and the Messiah came from his tribe. Tamar was counted more righteous than Judah, and her actions, even though they were sinful, preserved the lineage through which Jesus was born into the world. Rahab, her story is redeemed. She is in the Faith Hall of Fame. David, in spite of all of his great sin, adultery, murder, the Bible calls him a man after God's own heart. And he is the person in Jesus' lineage that Christ is most closely associated with. As I've said repeatedly today, Jesus was often referred to as the son of David. Bathsheba, part of the lineage that gave the world the Messiah. Solomon, disobedient, idolatrous, but also granted great wisdom. And he wrote the biblical books of Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Song of Songs. All of these were broken people. all of these were morally scandalous people, and yet God redeemed all of their stories, and God allowed them to play a role in his redemptive purposes for the world. And so this is what the genealogy of Jesus tells us, what we learn from it. So what should we take from this and apply to our lives today? I want to highlight 4 ways that we should apply this to our lives. Here's the first one. The genealogy of Jesus teaches us that no one is beyond redemption, and no one means no one. And here's the first thing you need to know about that. It means that your past does not disqualify you from being redeemed by God and being used by God in his mission to redeem the entire world. The enemy will try to tell you that your sin is too great, that you've been sinning too long, that what you did was too bad, that God won't forgive you, restore you, redeem you, make something good of your life. He can't do it because you're too bad. The enemy is a liar. All he does is lie. None of that is true. Your sin is not too great. You're not the worst sinner God's ever seen. It wasn't too bad. God will forgive you. He will restore you. He will redeem you. And he'll make something really good of your life. You just have to turn to him in faith. Turn to him in faith and he will do it. He'll redeem your life. And here's the second thing this means. And for a room full of mostly Christians here today, this is at least as important as what I just said to us. Second thing it means, other people's past doesn't disqualify them. Just like you, they have not gone too far. They have not done too much. They have not been too bad that they've gone beyond the reach of God's grace. No, their past does not disqualify them either. God wants them. God wants to forgive them, save them, restore them, redeem them. He wants to make something good and beautiful out of the lives of other people who have a bad past. And so let's not be that version of Christian that is always holding people's past against them. Let's be people who share God's heart to see people redeemed from their past and have something good and beautiful made of their lives. Don't tear people down with their past. Paint them a picture of the better future that God wants for them and that God can give them. And here's the next thing this means for us. The church should be like Jesus' family tree. And here's what that means. The church is a place for broken people to find healing. The church is a place for morally scandalous people to find healing. The church is a place for sinners to be welcomed and to be pointed to Christ and to be lovingly assisted in turning away from sin and finding redemption and healing in Jesus. The church is a place where when broken people come, we don't respond with, "Oh my, how'd you get in this mess?" Instead, we respond with, "Us too. You messed up your life because of sin? Us too." Of course, the church can never be a place that excuses sin or acts like sin isn't a big deal, but the church, and that's the Christians who make up the church, must always remember that the story of those who come broken and hurting and damaged by sin, their story is our story. They're not different than us. They're the same. People who need Jesus and the healing and the redemption that can only be found in him. And so the church is supposed to be like Christ's family tree, a place for broken people, a community of grace not a community of keeping up appearances. A community of grace, not a community where we act like we can't relate to the problems of the people that God sends us. If we can't relate, it's only a matter of a faulty memory. And that leads to the third thing we learn from the genealogy of Jesus and how it applies to our lives today. Your story can glorify God and point others to Jesus. This is an opinion, but I think it's an accurate opinion. Here's what Christians have a tendency to do once we've come to Jesus and found healing and redemption in Him. We tend to start acting like our past never happened. And certainly God doesn't want us living under condemnation to our past. So don't misunderstand what I'm going to say here, but we tend to start acting like our past never happened. And it's understandable that we do that. The past is often painful. The past can be embarrassing. The past has information about us that we wish did not exist. But here's the problem when we start acting like our past never happened. We deny people who are currently in the kind of situation we were once in an example of how God's grace and power can change their life. When we act like our past doesn't exist, we leave the impression to people struggling like we once did that they are uniquely messed up. That they are uniquely messed up. And that does great damage to people. They are not uniquely messed up. We leave them the impression that the church is only populated with people who have it all together. So this must not be the place for them. When someone is struggling with sin in their lives, or the damage that sin has brought to their lives, one of the greatest things that can ever happen for them is for someone who once was exactly where they are now to come alongside them and say, I know exactly what you're going through because I once was exactly where you are and involved in exactly what you're involved in. And let me tell you how I found help and healing, and I'll be happy to walk alongside you and help you like others once helped me. You say, well, Brian, how do I do that and not glorify my past sin? How do I do that and not embarrass myself because of stuff that I wish had not been a part of my life? And here's the answer. God's grace does that for us. If you've really encountered God's grace, I'm confident that His grace will empower you to share your story without glorifying your sin. And God's grace enables us to share our stories without being embarrassed, even though the information might be embarrassing information. You know, Rahab in the Faith Hall of Fame is still identified as the prostitute Rahab. All those years later, when the author of Hebrews wrote that, he still identified her as the prostitute Rahab. But he put her in the Faith Hall of Fame. Do you think he viewed her negatively? Do you think that he did that because he wanted to demean or belittle her? No. He did that because he wanted to glorify God's work in her life. And my guess is that if they would have asked Rahab, she would have said, no, that's fine. Go ahead and do that. That's who I was. It's not who I ended up. God's grace enables us to own our past, to share our past, and not to be embarrassed by it or feel guilt and condemnation by it anymore, because God sets us free from it. And part of setting us free from it is when we have the opportunity, we can share that past for the good of someone else and for the glory of God. I'm thankful that I know the backstories of these people in Jesus' genealogy. I'm thankful that we're not left to think that everybody in Jesus' genealogy was just a perfect, wonderful person. I like knowing the backstories of these people, because here's what it does for me. It helps me realize that if God could use them in his kingdom, then he can use me. If God loved them with everything they did wrong, I know he loves me in spite of what I've done wrong and what I'll continue to do wrong. And if God redeemed their lives, he can redeem my life. And your story can do for others what the genealogy of Jesus does for us. Serve as a testimony of God's grace and redemption, and to serve as a testimony that no past disqualifies a person from God's redemptive purposes. And finally, if I wanted to preach today's message with a single sentence, and you probably wish I'd opted for that, here is the sentence. I heard this phrase years ago from a pastor by the name of Russell Johnson in Lancaster, Ohio. It stuck with me ever since, and I hope it sticks with you because it's a great line. If I preach this message in one sentence, this is it. God's grace is greater than your disgrace. God's grace is greater than your disgrace. That's the message that we learn from the genealogy of Jesus. That's the message we learn from the teaching of the one who was born in Bethlehem's manger, lived a sinless life, died a substitutionary death, and rose again victorious over sin, death, the grave, and the devil. That is the message the Bible is telling us from the front cover to the back cover. God's grace is greater than your disgrace. And so no matter your story, turn to Jesus. He's got enough grace for you. He has the power to heal you, to restore you, to redeem you, to make something good, and to make something beautiful out of your life. That's why he was born in Bethlehem's manger. Because God does not want our disgrace to be the defining thing in our lives. He wants our lives to be defined by his grace. His grace is greater than my disgrace, greater than your disgrace, greater than all of our disgrace. God's grace is greater. And so if you're here today and you stand in need of God's grace, turn to him. And if you've experienced his grace, worship him. Because if you have experienced the grace of God, you know that he is worthy of all glory and honor. He's worthy of our appreciation. He is worthy of our praise. Why don't you stand?